Hey guys, it's Zach. I want to start talking about individual champions because I think one of the most interesting things in League of Legends is the way that individual champions fit into the meta. The way that they create a meta or the way that they influence the way the game is played and thought of. Like, how well designed are they? How much do they fit into a slot? How much do they give players a unique space to express themselves? So, like, a good example of that is like Yasuo, he moves like no other character in the game. No other character quite does the thing that Yasuo does, right? Um, Zed is another amazing example of that. Um, and in terms of the things that make a champion designed well or poorly, I think that Zed is actually one of the best champs in the game. I think he's designed incredibly well, and I think that's an unpopular opinion. So I want to kind of explain why. Um, the reason that I think he's designed so well is because Zed's opportunity cost is actually pretty enormous. The ways that he wins the game are far more fair than it can feel like they are. So I want to sum up Zed's strengths real quick, and then I want to talk about his weaknesses. So obviously his first big strength is that despite being an AD assassin, it's almost impossible to zone Zed off farm. He's resourceless, which also means he can start Dorn Shield, he can buy potions with a longsword. His Q is a 925 range, and his W extends that range by a further 650 for an absolutely absurd amount of range to gate cannon minions. Um, and like his Q and E both have AoE on them, so you can push waves with them or last hit multiple minions at a time with them. Very powerful. He has an escape from ganks up to 2 with his W and his ult, and his RW like ability to shift whenever he wants within 5 or 6 seconds, depending on which button, allows him to play a lot of like mind games the same way that LeBlanc does, which makes him even better at escaping stuff. His theoretical damage ceiling obviously is crazy. Zed's Q does slightly above the average damage of like a powerful assassin ability, but he can hit 3 of them in a single combo, and then of course that's amplified by Deathmark by an additional 1.55 for a total of an absurd amount of damage. And of course he can last hit in melee range incredibly easy between his E and passive being instant, and it's just like it feels like you can't put Zed off waves. Like, you can't push him off minions because he can farm for forever. You can't stop him from taking control of a wave because if you ever leave, he just deletes your wave with his AoE. You can't gank him because of his W, or especially his ult and his W. You can't survive his all-ins because a lot of his damage is theoretically lock on. He applies a slow, targets you with his dash, uses electrocute, auto E, most of that damage. That's all lock on damage, right? Um, there's so much about Zed that is really impressive. And then there are all of the cons that make Zed harder to play. Reaching the points where you are at a high is almost surprisingly difficult on Zed, and I want to talk about those. So, first, the farming thing. Zed can, from a distance, get almost every minion. He can't get every minion, and he is very easy to punish if he walks in to get every minion. Your Q's on a 6-second cooldown, which means if you perfectly throw every Q, you can get 5 Qs off over the course of a wave, which means you'd be missing a minion. If you were able to last hit 2 minions at a time, yeah, you could get every minion, but that also requires you to get every minion with a single ranged skill shot, including the range creeps, which you have to get with 3 individual skill shots. If you're playing against a lot of champions like Victor or Hui, they can poke you on 1 or 2 of those every single wave. If you're using this ability to farm, you're also not using it to trade. Zed's Shuriken is his only trade ability at long range, so he can't actually, like, trade poke if he's trying to last hit, which kind of removes that pseudo-ranged feeling. The moment that Zed throws a Q at a minion, you can walk up for about 4 seconds and poke him, and they just can't do anything about it. The energy mechanic isn't a big limiter in short fights, but this is number 2. It is in longer fights, and it is if you pressure him more than once over the course of a wave. If Zed feels the need to WEQ you and he misses his reset, he misses his abilities, he can't ult onto you during that time. Like right now, I can't ult in because if I R EQ, right, like I'm out of energy, I don't have my W shadow to escape. I can't feel comfortable ulting even if the Victor was close to kill range. Zed's Q has a 6-second cooldown. And then the third thing, which kind of leads into this, is that you are heavily telegraphed on your all-ins. So in lane, pre-level 11 especially, if Zed is to all-in you off a single trade, what he has to do is WEQ you, wait to make sure his Q comes back up, about 2 seconds. Then he can shadow in and ult you, at which point he can hit an auto attack, an E, 2 Qs, and ignite. but the 2 Qs requires you to not dodge. The auto attack in E requires you to not have a CC or dash buffered. Hitting the WEQ requires you to walk into Zed's WEQ range and not juke it, and the Zed has to have good aim. Basically, you have to use no defensive mechanics and walk into his all-in to get all-in off the first shadow. Normally, Zed has to do something like that to find an all-in. Finally, the last bit of opportunity cost is that for Zed to deal his damage, he has to use abilities, and that sounds silly, but Zed can't really put out auto attack damage, not in the way that you'd hope he could. His window for auto attack damage is 3 seconds, which is 2 auto attacks most of the time. You can get 3 if you auto attack start to finish, just click the guy, but if you're moving consistently, if someone hits you with a CC, if they dash, Zed can normally get 2 auto attacks into his ult. That's not a lot of auto attack damage, and it means that most of his damage, if he's not fed, has to come from his Q, his skill shot, right? His E, yeah, but most of Zed's damage is loaded into his Q. So he's limited by his energy when he all-ins. He's limited by his Q cooldown heavily because it's both his trade ability and his farm ability. His all-ins are limited by his Q cooldown, and they're telegraphed by his Q cooldown, and his W placement. And the ability to counterplay Zed's all-in damage is very high, because you can... all of his damage has to be done during his ult, which means you can immediately react to it with a CC, a shield, or whatever, and lower it. So, basically what I'm saying is, unless everything goes perfectly or the Zed heavily outplays you, to die to Zed, if he's not fed, you basically have to mess up, or take a lot of damage before he ults you. That's what assassins are supposed to do. They're supposed to capitalize off your weaknesses, right? So why does Zed feel so frustrating if there's these, layers of windows of counterplay built into the champion? The biggest one is if Zed gets a lead, it can feel really harsh. If the Zed player gets a lead, they're probably playing pretty well. If they are playing well, they're probably hitting their Qs, and if every Zed Q hits, he feels like the most broken champ alive. And he kind of is. It's the Ezreal function, right? If you have overloaded damage, and it's balanced by the fact that your damage is in a skill shot, if you hit every skill shot, your character seems like God. And that just feels bad to get, EQQ auto-attacked by Zed and die from full HP. But it's real, it's something Zed can do. If Zed's ahead, he also can kill you without hitting a Q at all, right? If Zed is ahead of the ADC and he's level 12 and the AD is level 10 or 9, and Zed are WRs from out of vision, lock on engage, auto E-ignite, and then flashes to follow, or you don't have flash or whatever, and autos you a second time, he can kill you. That's an easy 1,200-1,300 damage, less, more, depending on how fed he is. And yeah, that's horrible. That feels really bad. But it's worth pointing out that a lot of that is because Ignite, Electrocute, and Sudden Impact allow for a ton of extra damage to be thrown into your combo. That doesn't exist nearly as often if you have Conqueror. That doesn't exist nearly as often if the ADC has any defensive mechanic, including Barrier. Doesn't exist if the Zed isn't super fed. He just can't do it without hitting at least 1 Q, which gives you more counterplay. And if you see Zed on vision, and he isn't getting a kill, he's not doing what he wants, which leads into the fourth thing, and this is the big thing. Zed's opportunity cost is brilliant. Zed's Q, as I mentioned, is a trade ability, a farming ability, and a required part of his all-in. His W is a farming ability, a trade ability, and a required part of his escapes, and most of the time a required part of his all-ins. His E, it's not any of those, but it relies on either his R or his W to work, and if it's being used as a farm ability, it's still draining his energy slowly. If he's using his E as a farm ability, he can't slow with his shadow for a Q, right? And then his ult, it's a second W and an untargetable gap closer, but it places you in a very specific spot. So you give the opponent a chance to know exactly where you are in half a second. That's a very, very frustrating thing to have in League of Legends. It does mean that a lot of the power is put in Zed's hands, where he can reactively use that ability, and so it can feel very punishing to go in on Zed. But it also means that if the Zed messes up, the capitalization on it is crazy. You can often just kill Zed if he misplaces his ult. You can kill Zed if he mismanages his long W cooldown. You can kill Zed if he uses his Q to farm too much and you just keep poking him out. Or if he misses his Qs. And that's maybe the final thing, is that in essence, Zed is a hard movement check champion. If he hits all his Qs on you in the lane, you just lose. And if he misses every Q, he just loses. Most of the time, neither of those things will happen. But it's almost impossible for a Zed matchup to be decided by anything other than skill. Now, maybe it's not your skill. Maybe you go even against the Zed in a matchup where you should be countered, you feel really good, and then he goes and picks up 3 kills bot lane. That's not different from other assassins. What's different is the fact that it feels like Zed should be fair, and then he isn't. It's like, wow, this champion's power is built into skill shots and shifty mechanics and dodging my shit with his ult, and instead he just locked onto me and killed me instantly. He went untargetable, he was completely safe because he could swap back instantly with his ult and get out of whatever I wanted. This feels broken. But it wasn't broken. The rest of your team made a big mistake and you got punished for it. And that sucks ass, but League is a team game, and it just happens. Sometimes the enemy assassin gets fed off champions that aren't, you didn't have the ability to influence it. So, at its core, Zed loses to a lot of things and wins to a lot of things. He wins to his own skill, he wins to getting gold in strange places, he wins to good matchups where he can dodge things, he wins to matchups that can't punish his Q farming, but he loses to everything that can, right? If he ever ults onto an Ahri, a Gragas, a Syndra, they will immediately CC him coming out of his ult, and they will take that champion's entire combo. If he ults into someone with an exhaust or an untargetable, his ult is completely wasted, so he can't do it. The onus is on the Zed to find an opening. If he tries to constantly poke somebody with naturally higher movement speed in combat or micro dashes, right? If Zed is trying to poke down a Vayne or a Fiora or something, like that's really hard for Zed to do. And finally, he's a lethality non-auto attack assassin, which means he can't scale comfortably with crit, so he does fall off at 30-40 minutes into the game. I didn't touch on a couple things, like, yeah, Zed has high objective control now, thanks to the buffs to Jungle Zed and his passive. Yes, the untargetable can prove to be like a bigger thing than I talked about, but the point isn't that individually one of his tools is too strong or too weak. The point is that all of his abilities, all of the things that exist, there's a reason that they're fair. And the reason is because you can punish everything Zed does. Every single thing Zed does can be punished, unless he's so fed it doesn't matter. Final point. That like clause that I keep having to add, oh, if Zed's so fed, it doesn't matter. That applies to every champion in League of Legends. If I'm fed on Gangplank and I miss every barrel, I can walk up and auto-Q you and you die. If I'm fed on Soraka and I miss every Q and I still WRW my carry, they still gain 2,000 health, right? Like, you can, when you are fed, you are allowed to miss the micro skill check of every champion. Zed is included in that, but Zed is also excluded heavily from removing that micro skill check if he's not ahead. You cannot kill somebody on Zed if you are behind and you do not hit Qs. Alright, that's it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Zed. I'd love to hear what other champions you'd like to talk about from a design perspective. Let me know what you think of this. I know this is less, like, targeted on, you know, theory of how to get good, theory of how to play the game better, whatever, than a lot of my other stuff, but this is part of my passion for the game, is, like, the design and all that. Yeah, that's it. See ya.